men rise, gods and goddesses, titans, celestials, star seeds, initiates, adepts, occultists, alchemists, brujas, warlocks, whatever you may be, remember, today is the only day that matters. Remember, you are the only one that matters. Welcome to the God Hour Podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 34. The curious case of correspondence. One of the major keys is not only acquiring the information, acquiring the knowledge, but learn how to apply it in everyday life. Remember, around here we trying to make this normal, because we gotta start thinking as the guys, we gotta start thinking as the titans, we gotta start thinking as the chaos beings. And the only way to do that is to apply these laws, these formulas, these principles to our works. In this week, we're gonna get into the aspects of the shadow work. This week's session, we're gonna break down 10 going on 30, understanding how one transmutes behavior through traumas, perspective and projection, grow beyond the old sights to learn new vision. And we're gonna end it off with existing and resisting, letting go of the patterns to live in the now. But before we get into that, of course, we're gonna get into the God thought. Then, Papa Lucy's, I'm gonna give you that reading for that clarity. And then we're gonna get into another episode. Welcome to the God Hour Podcast. You can be anywhere in the world right now, but it resonates with you to be here at this moment, at this trajectory point. In between your day being the only day and you being the only one that matters, and getting to the crosshairs of understanding every aspect of the reflections of your environment. Yeah. Stay tuned for the God thought. God thought. Welcome to this week's God thought. If life's not the way you wanted it, then blaming the other people around you or your circumstances might be keeping you exactly where you don't want to be. Looking into the aspects of blaming everything else is like looking into the mirror under the high definition lights and blaming it for the blemishes and scars that you see. We understand that we are governed by those universal laws and those principles. When we are not in line with these laws, nature will have its way of letting you know. This week I'm going to be sharing that information on the law of correspondence. Understanding that our outer world is nothing more than a reflection of as within, so without, as above, so below. So if we setting that tone based on having the information, having the knowledge, having the light, we have to learn how to move that light through our own darkness to bring ourselves into alignment with what we desire. Nothing more than being angry, self-loathing, being a pawn. We're not understanding that everything in this space, everything in your environment is governed by the correspondence. If you say that niggas ain't shit, then guess what? You're always gonna see niggas ain't being shit. But who was the first nigga that wasn't shit in your life? Or wasn't there to be shit in your life? What about the last bitches ain't shit? Same thing. Who was or who was not there to be whatever it was in your life? This is how we gotta start looking at these things and applying these all this knowledge, the intellectual concept that's our flaw, work on our foundation, which is our genius, to help us strive to our intelligence. But we don't get more into this in this week's session. Before we get to that, let's get to this reading. This has been the God Thought. Welcome to the God Hour. Papa Lucy and Master of Ceremonies. Let's get into this reading for that clarity. Let's get these cards shuffled up for this week's weekly reading. First card, we pulling out the Three of Pentacles. This is a Revelations deck, so when I do the reading, I'm going to incorporate both to bring clarity so it resonates to that wider aspect of yourself. In the upright position, the Three of Pentacles represents the aspect of teamwork, collaboration, learning, and implication. In the reverse position, it represents disharmony, misalignment, and working alone. The second card is the Two of Cups. Upright, it explains the aspects of united love, partnership, mutual attraction. In reverse, it aspects of understanding the aspects of self-love, those breakups that are needed, and the disharmony and distrust. Third card, Five of Wands. Upright, it understands the aspects of conflict, disagreements, and competition, tension, and diversity. Reverse, it means working on the inner conflicts, perhaps that conflict avoidance, and the tension releasing. Fourth card, the Tower. Upright, it stands for sudden change, upheaval, chaos, and revelation, awakening. In reverse, or reflection, the personal transformation, the fear of change, or averting from the disasters, trying to keep peace. And the final card, before we get into the reading, the Seven of Wands. Upright, it stands for competition, protection, and perseverance. In the reverse, reflection, exhaustion, giving up, and overwhelm. Let's get into this reading. The Three of Pentacles indicates checking your collaborations and the aspects of where you're learning from. Are you feeling a sense of disharmony with your goals? If so, what are the implications within others showing you about yourself? This is giving more clarity when we get into the Two of Cups. As the second card, we see that through the learning, validating what is seen to be mutual bonds. But what are these mutual bonds based off exactly? There's going to be a lot of breakups in order to make up with yourself. Implementing healthy boundaries to raise the frequency and reinforce your new consistency. Through the Three of Wands, we see that external conflicts cause tension to set boundaries, and that competes with the illusionary tension that the battle of the disagreements of what's best for you at this moment of now. That leads us to the Tower card. It also shows the changes seem sudden. Don't stress it. They all are part of the transition process. The upheaval of what you fear, shifting from safety of complacency to the chaos of creation. That leads us to the final card. We see through the Seven of Pentacles, the overwhelm and the exhaustion that stay the same is in competition with your healing and your perseverance. Let it happen. Allow the learning why from the disharmony of old bonds and gain that clarity to building healthy boundaries. See the external conflicts as points to open and release the tension. Sudden change is an inevitable part of your transition. Without it, how you gonna know how to set those boundaries for yourself? how are you going to be able to go any further from where you at right now? You came to this point for a reason. To turn back now? Nah. It's to create that path of corresponding natures that embody manifesting all that you desire. This has been this week's weekly reading. If it resonates, use and embrace the message. Use this clarity and insights to reach new heights. We're about to get into this week's episode. This has been your reading with Papa Lucy. I love you. We love us. Ashe and blessed be to the day. May it be everything you need, rather required, to create everything you desire. Welcome to another episode of the God Hour Podcast. It's your host and your master of ceremonies, Papa Lucy. And this first segment of this week's session is titled 10 going on 30. The aspects of understanding how through the trauma is transmuted our reality, or better yet, the aspects of understanding how the trauma itself and how one transmutes behavior through the traumas. This week we get into the law of correspondence. That's going to be that key aspect as we're moving forward. As above, so below, as within, as without. Sometimes we get the knowledge. And we depend heavily on the knowledge to carry us through. We depend heavily on this wokeness to get us through. That's not the case. You have to be able to apply it in your everyday life. You have to be able to apply these knowledge, because all these are the rhythms, algorithms, and the formulas and the principles to help us release from where we at now. That's the key aspect to that. And that's what we're gonna get into today. When I think about childhood trauma, when I think about the behavior patterns, the development, I think about this aspect of thinking about a boy becoming a man, a girl becoming a woman, like that God and goddess transition. But if the trauma is an initiation period, the trauma initiates new behavior. So if you look at somebody that went through life with little to no trauma, had a pretty decent childhood, at some point in time, to bring balance within the law of correspondence, there will have to be an event or a trauma or a crisis, anything that changes or shifts the behavior at that point in time. There's going to be something is going to happen. This is based upon environment, everything within the environment, thought forms, and everything that creates it in that nature. So when we look at the state of a lot of people, when we look at the state of a 30-year-old man, a 20-year-old, whatever the age may be, and we ask ourselves these questions, are fear of marriage, fear of owning a business, fear of being anything other than something better for themselves. When we think about this on our own aspect, we have to remember that at a point in time, there was something that may have triggered and shut down and shut off a switch. Remember, going through your DNA, everything from the food that you eat to everything from the food that you eat down to the people that you're around. Everything is a reflection of something that's shutting something off in the DNA. Certain aspects are being turned on, certain aspects are being turned off. That creates a correspondence or a corresponding similarity within that polarity. So if I think about myself when I was 12, 13 years old. And that was my first time with my babysitter. And she was, I want to say she was like 14, 15. She had broke up with her boyfriend and she was crying or whatever. And she was hurting and whatever it may be. So she was going through a traumatic event. And I always had that boyhood crush. So that was used to that advantage. So I think about aspects like that and what else is connected to that led me to that point, because that's even an effect. So then the corresponding effect from that correspondence of that effect, in order for me to understand the effects of me stepping into that realm and doing so with my babysitter, I have to also step back to the aspects of how that came into play. Find the original cause. Because until I find the original cause, I'm only acting off of the effect. I'm only corresponding the way that I move, the way that I perpetuate myself throughout my life based on the effects. And that's the biggest thing. We have this aspect when we are asking others to be a certain way or go into a certain mindset of being a certain pattern of growth, but we don't take into account those traumas that led to that corresponding feature. We think about maturity being simply being grown. Get myself situated. We think about the aspect of maturity being that growth, but maturity also comes from the experience. So what experience led to that aspect of growth? Where was that person, the natural development within that space? You think about a 5-year-old in that aspect, starting school. They've already learned their basic functions of numbers and math or whatever. And then imagine if something happens to that 5-year-old at that point in time. Those keys of development in that space reset the neurological algorithms within their mind, because they're going to be translating things through that space. So things that you could have learned when you were 5 years old, first day of school for most, unless you went to Head Start, unless you was late, then you had to go to school later. The normal aspects of a 5-year-old, those become those developmental things that are supposed to be developed at that time are now stunted. That learning aspect, that absorbing information, it can be locked behind literally a trauma. So we think about those development issues later on in life, what was supposed to be learned, those things can be repressed. So think about the corresponding effect to that cause. These are the things that we got to look at and start getting more in depth with when we are working upon our shadow work. Understanding how we are transmuting through pain that creates a new behavior. Understanding how you're transmuting through that trauma, the pain of that trauma, and it initiates a new behavior. So if that goes unchecked, that goes unlooked at, that goes unseen, undealt with, brought to the surface, you can look at somebody that's well off in their 20s, 25, 26, people in their 30s that are still stunted in a certain developmental program, and their pattern has been askew. So when we think about things like this, such as the state of there's not any good black men or there's no good black women, that's in this aspect. That goes even deeper when it comes into your awakening, because you're still going to have that developmental issue in taking in information. When you study, when you visualize, the key of going back to your inner child, of being able to visualize, being able to have that imagination, being able to use those patterns to create a ritual, to meditate, to set intentions, to burn candles, to do any magic. It's all but hidden behind that development stunt, that handicap that's now been put there. So you may be able to go to a certain level intellectually, but when it comes to actually doing that work, it's hidden behind that aspect. This is one thing that we really have to start understanding, because you can be upset at somebody for acting a certain way. You look at somebody acting a certain way, they act childish, or they never take up for themselves. And this goes into the biggest aspect of looking or reflecting your environment, and you look at somebody around you that acts as a child. So you got a man and he act like a little kid when it comes to video games and whatever it may be. These are just examples on that. Video games and whatever it may be, based on the immaturity, but you don't know at what point in time something happened to them in their life. Or if that reflection is reflecting to you something that happened to your life around that same time. So you haven't moved past that space. So the universe, all those layers that you're getting filtered over the top of it based upon your identity and your ego of where you should be in life, time, all these other aspects you get locked in, time, where you think you should be in life, what you think you should have at this point in time. You should have a ring, or you think that she need to be a better wife, she ain't worth having a ring, or you should be a rapper or whatever. All of these things are locked in between the space and the confines of that trauma. Understanding and isolating that aspect of that trauma is going to help us shape our reality. Until you're adjusting, when this is the most important part within shadow work, is actually the acknowledging, the forgiving, the learning, the compassion, the applying. Because once I've applied this healing, until I've applied the healing, I cannot put in a boundary. Until you apply the healing, you can't add the boundary. You can't set the tone for what you're going to do, because that boundary is based off of compassion. Understanding the situation and where it lies and where you're at. And I have to do this for myself. I got to be healthy for myself. I got to make this boundary for myself. And in order for me to reach you, in order for you to in order for you to learn and continue being in my space, you got to come to this frequency. You got to go through the work that you got to go through in yourself to come to this frequency. There's no more going back to things just because of simply being family, simply being friends, simply being acquaintances, whatever it may be. There is no going back. What we do, we can set our standards. We can set the new parameters. We can study the new paradigms. We can understand all of these principles. We can bring all of that into effect, all that intellectual property into effect, and build a nice sturdy floor. But until you literally go deep within, you're not going to be able to put the pipe work, put the electrical boxes and the air conditioning unit and all that unit into your house, the shit that keeps you cool, the shit that keeps you balanced, the shit that keeps you powered up. You can't even tap into any of these aspects until you're addressing those shadows. This goes into the biggest aspect of the narrative. Whenever we see a reflection, I use the R. Kelly thing as an example. Everybody was mad about the R. Kelly. I got the channel as reinforcement. I can always guarantee that most of the people that were getting upset about that, they had an instance that happened inside of their life. For we'll say the 90% that jumped on and was mad just because of based on a moral standard of being within that space and doing that, I can say about 10% of them actually went through something of that nature. It's not talked about in the household. This is where it comes into making these conversations normal. We have to be able to make these conversations normal and normalize these conversations, because that's a part of that enlightenment. It does no good for you to say economic plans and we need more economic plans. We need to be able to balance and teach our kids. What are you teaching your children? In order to teach your children, you got to have a scape in a mind that's open to every perspective in what you're going to give to your child. You got to be able to teach from a balanced space you got to be able to come from a balanced space to create a balanced space. A lot of us are not within a balanced space. A lot of us still have those shadows. A lot of people have those shadows that they haven't dealt with. So that disconnection from power leaves you trying to control something else outside of you, trying to keep this control of this external state, trying to keep your status up, build this status and keep your status and be who you said that you wanted to be based on the trauma. But outside of that identity, you start understanding that the way that you act, when you see somebody that's acting in a childish manner or in a manner that seems that haven't matured to get to a certain level, and it's not in a way of healthy banter, there's an aspect that's hurt within them. And until they address that, they'll never be able to fully sink to their true power. They'll always have a sense of trying to find control in some narrative of their mind. They're always going to try to keep some type of control within their environment to give that aspect of self-sacrifice, when it's really just self-sabotage. A lot of us self-sabotage our own interactions with the reflections instead of allowing ourselves to become still and understand that space. Understand how that corresponds to me. If it resonates with you, find how it resonates with you. When people saw the R. Kelly thing, I remember listening to Red Pill, Blue Pill on an interview. He was like, yo, that's happening in our neighborhoods. That's why you can see it up there. They were explaining the reflection of thought. So you're seeing this reflection and it's resonating with somebody, it's resonating with you or somebody that you know. It's time to have that discussion. It's time to start having these discussions on that scale to heal. If you have not found that space, that's why I created my entire platform is based upon actually doing that work, working on those shadows, bringing those things to the light, dealing with those things, healing from them things, having the understanding within that space and allowing yourself to actually grow. A lot of us have stunted growth based on, we feel that because we're in our late 20s, we feel like we're in our 30s, we're in our 40s, that we've grown past it. But we're not understanding that we are literally pulling from the correspondence from that side of the parallel. So all of that hurt that happened back in the day to you, trauma, whatever it may be, the childhood traumas and whatever it may be that happened in that space, that's where your energy is in correspondence to your life now. That's where it's coming from. So shit's not just happening. I can't stress that enough. Shit's just not happening. This shit's been online. It's coming from somewhere. And you got to understand the corresponding factors of the effect to the cause. You got to see the original cause. And then once you go to that original cause within you, you're able to unlock that generational gap, the generational gaps that have been caused. Because this causes that generational gap. So this can go all the way back. You go back, we can say aspects of being prisoners of war. And you go back into that space and buck breaking and motherfuckers and all these shits for these terms got created from. And then those things were not dealt with. They weren't dealt with in the confines of that control. It just became live through that trauma. What we do now is live through the trauma. So you have somebody that literally is at a 10-year-old mindset in their 30s, dealing with the aspects of, because they didn't learn the developmental skills of money. They didn't learn the developmental skills of building a company, doing anything with business, expressing their emotions, bringing their emotions into balance. All of these things are within that narrative that we haven't learned from. So when you're thinking about why can't we get on track? Why can't we do this? This is one of those main factors, but you have to singleize it and become self-aware of yourself, bringing yourself into that tone, That way you're able to set those boundaries based on those new parameters, based on those standards that you now set. You can't set standards. I said it yesterday during Meditate and Elevate. You're moving in a state of 24 hours when if you waking up at, even if you wake up at 4 a.m., you only got 24 hours. So if you waking up at 9 a.m. to get ready, that means you only got 15 hours. If you waking up about 12 in the afternoon, that means you got even less time than that. Your correspondence to where you're gravitating your information from and your balance from is out of balance with how you're applying it. So you can't tell somebody in that aspect of that learning, a lot of these narratives that we have accepted and carried forward, even when we get this new information, this new knowledge, that new light, we ain't even understanding the first shit before it. You ain't applied, you've applied based on your identity. This type of knowledge, this knowledge of yourself, this work, that shadow work, this is applying to this is applying to your soul. This is applying to the light within you, empowering yourself and allowing yourself to grow. This ain't got nothing to do with your fucking ego. Your ego gonna keep you being a fucking prisoner. Your ego keeps you being a victim. Have you ever met somebody that literally, they act as a victim? And then have you ever looked at somebody that acts as a victim? Think about how they speak. Think about at the time point whenever the trauma actually happened and that new pattern that's been created that they're now acting through. So you can have somebody pay attention when you're in, like, even if you're in these relationships, a lot of these relationships, you want this man to be this or you want this chick to be this, but you don't understand that they can very well be the reflecting from a corresponding point of somewhere where you did not heal. So if that becomes the case, they're a reflective aspect of somewhere where you did not heal, you got to look into it. That becomes the major key and the major factor into you growing into yourself. This becomes the major key and the factor into you actually setting the new tone. This becomes that major key factor until you're able to take these factors into yourself. Apply that, allow that light to go through and bring that shit to the surface. You're only going to be doing the same thing over and 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 over again. You're going to steady be stuck in that mindset where you got hurt when you were 5. You're going to steady be stuck in that aspect of whatever happened to you when you were 5 years old. You're going to be transmuting your behaviors through the 5-year-old psyche. You're going to be transmuting your behaviors through the 12-year-old psyche. You're going to be transmuting your behaviors through the aspect, through the initiation point of when the trauma arrived. So think about that. That's building your identity. You built your whole identity off of a trauma. And now you want something new to happen, or you want to manifest and you want to grow abundant. You want to move to certain aspects. But in order for that to happen, the corresponding energy of the kinetic energy, that kinetic flow pulse, is what has to stay in place. As an occultist, as an alchemist, you work with the potential energy. So until I heal that aspect, that's kinetic energy, because everything is going to be pulsing from that space. That goes into the aspect, you think about your root chakra. A lot of people move off their root chakra. They move off of survival. They move off what they were grounded off of. So they gain their confidence, which is actually an aspect of their arrogance, the narcissistic aspect, and they gain power from being a narcissist. They gain power from keeping things close to their heart, getting close to your heart while not getting close to theirs. They get power in speaking at a certain tone. They get power in seeing in a certain way and envisioning things in a certain way, and they're convincing you to actually see it in that fucking light. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. It's not cute to be in your 30s and you still act as a 12-year-old. And this is not meaning to the aspect of disrespecting. This is the aspect of healing you, making you acknowledge that shit. Because it's like, even even outside of the realm of becoming enlightened, becoming spiritual and balanced, even to the regular people, even to a regular individual, one that has not accepted or does not know their godhood, God and goddesshood, their king and queen status. It's not cute. It's not something, just like I said last week, saying that you are, that's the way you are, that's just not cute. Understanding the correspondence to how you led to that aspect until you do it. That's like if you never had your father in the home, or you had a father that was not up to the par to show you nurturing and allow you to have that space to actually grow with knowledge, then every guy that you run into is going to translate through that same behavior pattern. So every guy that you're going to meet is going to have an issue. Every guy that you're going to meet is going to have a problem. Every guy that you meet is going to be at a certain point until you reach the breaking point. The universe is going to then align you. Once you say you want change enough and you vibrating that out that way, remember the frequency that you put it out on, if it's based on fear, it's gonna move really, really fast. You ain't gonna catch it. It's once you start loving yourself, that first aspect, when you start working on your shadows, you start loving yourself and embracing yourself and actually coming from a space called love, and then you initiate that you want change. That's when you're gonna get that individual that's within an aspect of at a certain level of balance to challenge you to go to the next level. Just go to the same things for the brothers, the kings. Until you actually start doing that healing process and stop moving from the aspect of fear, because fear gonna make them move right by you. You ain't even gonna see them. You're not gonna be able to connect to them because they're from an aspect of balance of love. You're from a balance of fear. Fear and love cannot be in the same aspect. They can't be on the same sympathetic frequency. So when you start loving yourself and tapping into yourself and start looking at those issues within yourself, and you saying that you want change, you saying that you want to grow, that's when you're going to attract the next individual. That you're always going to attract the individual that's going to challenge you. But how they challenge you is based upon the positive and the negative. If you're always saying that bitches ain't shit, and you coming from a space because your mother wasn't there, or your mother wasn't there, your aunts and they weren't there, they didn't show you what it is that healed from a healed aspect, they came from a wounded feminine aspect. Then when you're in that space, that's all you're going to attract is other wounded females. All you're going to keep attracting is these wounded brothers. And then when you come into that aspect of healing, the universe going to be like, all right, cool, you healed enough. The spirits and the ancestors going to hit you out. You healed enough. You say that you're ready for it. We don't hit you with it. And then you're going to get hit with that person that's not going to listen to arguments. Some people do not understand, based on that trauma, based on being in that 10-year-old mindset we use as an example at that starting point. Some don't understand what a healed relationship looks like. Somebody does not understand that it's different from talking at each other and actually comprehending what you're saying. Actually listening to learn instead of listening to reply. Assuming, building your entire scape of mind based off of something that happened to you before because it makes you feel comfortable. That's something that we really have to start looking at. That aspect of being comfortable within that trauma. Because a lot of us have become complacent within our traumas. A lot of us have become complacent in the attention that we're getting from those traumas. So it sounds nice to cry and say, yeah, I've been hurt before and whatever it may be. But until you're acknowledging why you keep continuously getting hurt, you're going to keep getting the correspondence of, I'm telling you, I told you all the things so you wouldn't do it. All you did is, in reality, told your reflection what to hide. That's the reality. You just told your reflection what to hide. You told your reflection to hide cheating, hide infidelities, hide stealing money, hide all those aspects. You told them to hide the byproducts so you can be in a false state of complacency within your space. Until you acknowledge those aspects, you're only going to be going from that development aspect. That's one of those aspects when you think about the NLP and you think about the neurons and the rhythm, this new sense of setting your new formula, your formula don't work no more at this level. A lot of people are realizing that their formula doesn't work at this level. The formula that you apply back in that old level, get upset, do whatever you wanted to do, call for a separation, whatever it may be, that formula don't work up in them. That energy that formula that you used back then to survive is not going to come into this level where you're trying to sustain and grow. It ain't going to work. And you have to be able to acknowledge that. So you ever seen somebody else get mad like a 12-year-old and go into that 12-year-old mindset? They're hurting. They're hurt from that space. It can be shown to you, but you got to be open to that body of light. This is understanding that pathway. In that understand, this is understanding those neural pathways, understanding those patterns and setting a new tone, putting yourself into this space where you actually need to heal. These are all key aspects and actuators that are within that. And until you do it, you're really not going to grow or go anywhere. You're going to continue you're going to live out your life against the wishes against what your grandmother did or your mom did, your father did or no father did or whatever it may be. And you're going to keep repeating that narrative within yourself. But we ain't done with this. We're going to get a little bit deeper. Leave it up to the first break of the podcast. I see y'all. You feel like you got a voice? Feel like you got something to say? Feel like you have something that can move the masses or get everybody tuned in and you want a bigger audience? Whether it can be anything from something like the God Hour or anything from like sports, news, fashion week, whatever it may be. Let me put you on to something. The easiest way to do it is with the Anchor app. Biggest thing about it is free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will even do all of the distribution for your podcast for you so it can be heard on many other platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money. You also can make money from your podcast with a minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. It's everything you need to get your voice heard and get what you feel that's in your heart and into your heart out to the masses. If you're interested, download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. And we back to this. I knew one of the key things about me being a coach, a teacher, counselor, a healer, from the healing aspect, you just know when it's going to be one of those, you kind of know when the episode and how it's going to go. So I knew there was going to be a part 2 to this aspect. I laid out a whole bunch of stuff. It was getting heat, but I was like, I got to put in the aspects of understanding that space. So this is part 2 of the first segment, 10 going on 30. Now we look into these aspects of correspondence. So if everything's within correspondence based on a cause and effect, you heal to a certain level. You heal to a certain level. You feel that you've healed. You feel that you've gotten to a certain point and can't nobody tell you shit, and you're now in the spiritual aspect or the woke aspect. Until you're in that space of it, that's cool. That's fine. Welcome. But there's a level to enlightenment and understanding. Enlightenment is the aspect of the understanding and the compassion of the knowledge and the formulas that you apply. Applying that law, accepting that law as law and living by that law, understanding every term that it is by law. So what happens for a lot of people, even if you go from the aspect of healing and then you meet, I always hear people talk about narcissists and to that level. I got to narcissists and explain that in an episode, but we don't go deeper into it because it fits into this curious case of correspondence. If you meet a narcissistic person, what are the qualities of the narcissistic person? What are the qualities that make that person a narcissist? Now, remember, everything outside of you is a reflection of you. So there is something that is within inside you that corresponds to that attraction, or else the attraction wouldn't happen. Remember, everything's an aspect to learn. So when you hear certain people get upset about narcissist or toxic or demon dick, whatever it is, demon pussy or whatever it may be, demon yoni, demon, whatever the fuck it may be, you still have not understood the full aspect and potential of what you can learn from that space. Remember, you're saying that you're an occultist. You're saying that you're an alchemist. You're saying that you're a god and a goddess. That means you work with the potential energy. You no longer work with kinetic energy. So if you're seeing something, it's a potential space for you to actually learn from and accept your responsibility and take accountability in how do I keep attracting this type of narrative? This happens a lot of times whenever, especially when you meet this guy and he's great, but then he's childish in this, or he's childish with money, or he's childish with this. He's childish with money, or she's not good with money, or she doesn't have a drive, or he doesn't have drive. And let's look at the aspects of where you don't have drive. You can have all the money in the world, but they may have learned how to become abundant in attracting money. They may have learned how to unconsciously charge themselves to be able to attract money, to be tracked based on their abundance. So they're attracting you and you're all about money, and they've charged themselves, whether realizing it or not, based on being abundant. That's why you keep attracting these individuals, because you're still thinking about the money aspect. You think about the byproduct. You ain't thinking about charging yourself to become the counterpart for what you were trying to achieve. This is that line that you have to be able to draw within the sand. Taking yourself from, I feel that I deserve this, or I feel like I'm entitled to this. Why can't I find a man that can take care of me? Why can't I find a chick that cook, clean, and all these aspects? You're translating through the original trauma. Think about that aspect going back, as I've said before. Grandparents were together for 46, 56 years, 60, 70 years. Why were they together for so long? Not the what kept them together for so long. The what is probably based upon the trauma, but why were they together for so long? How were they together so long? Remember, we're going from what to think to how to think. Why were they together for so long? What era was it? There was a lot of trauma within that space. So if you want to continue and have that same thing, that corresponding trauma got to stay in place. So the traumas that they went through, he cheated and she didn't leave because they had kids and all these narratives and aspects, those only get translated into this space, corresponding based on that polarity. So now you got, and it's crazy because now you got that aspect of cheating and all that, side chicks, side niggas, side dudes, that evolved from the aspect of making it okay to cheat. And now you got people talking about polygamy, polyandry. Just really think about that. What did you think it was going to evolve into? Now you got everybody talking about polygamy. Right after motherfuckers became side chicks and side niggas. Really think about that shit. What are you evolving based on the correspondence? You corresponded and correlated that in. Your immaturity level of understanding it, being in that 10-year-old mindset, that 5-year-old mindset, based upon whatever trauma locked you into that space, that algorithm now translates and transmutes that behavior into something new until it's addressed. Think about your I know one of my grandfathers had his share of women, Susie Mays and Miss Richardson up the street and all that good stuff. I know he had that. I know that was within the Akashic records because I can look at my time now and I can see how that trigger was activated within family members, going all throughout my mother's side, my pop's side, my father, like everybody's side. I can see it. So it was already there. But me addressing it and looking at it and seeing how it came into fruition, because most of my aunts weren't even married to their first husband or the baby father or whatever. So that narrative was already within there. But we like to take it and like say, forget about it and then go forward. That's that key aspect of understanding, like, oh shit, that shit comes from that. This shit came from that. How did it come from that? It don't look like that. We're not talking about image. We're talking about energy. We're talking about the energy, the kinetic energy. And the only way to stop that kinetic pulse is to create from the potential energy to destroy that pulse. That's the aspect of the generational curses and acquiring generational wealth and generational abundance and generational learning and the literacies that you want to tap into. You gotta always go back and find the cause. What caused you to keep finding these narcissistic ass dudes? Maybe because after you break up with the dude, you go on a narcissistic type rant about these narcissistic dudes. What makes you keep attracting these narcissistic crazy women? Maybe because when you go on your rant after you break up, you go crazy and you say shit about narcissistic rant about crazy ass women. Oh shit, wait, there's a song for that. There's a saying for that. So you now give yourself acceptance. You know, crazy bitches got the best pussy. You know, niggas with no job got the, you know them no good niggas got the best dick. They become the byproduct of the conduit of your thought. So now you stuck within that space because you're liking the attention from what you're getting. You look just like an 8-year-old on their birthday or a 16-year-old on their sweet 16 birthday. The way you popping that shit open for this nigga that said he was selling a couple bags. You blowing out candles on your cake, celebrating this chick when she really isn't doing anything. This also goes into that narrative when you set in that tone. Most women and most dudes in that narrative of not being healed, and that's from an unhealed aspect. I don't care what the fuck you say. It's from an unhealed aspect. They want the bare minimum. Oh, he cook, he cleans, he takes care of himself. He got a nice car. That you might as well say, oh, he got a nice car, he take care of himself, he cook, he clean. And then you connect to the dude based on that, but then he got mother issues, he got father issues, he got all these underlying issues. So he created his identity to hide those issues. It's the best way for you to understand and move forward. It's setting that tone that there's somebody that you can build with on all levels and not someone that you got to build up. This is a big major factor. You have to be able to build with people and not have to build them up constantly. And this takes you out of that narrative of, well, women want a man to make sure that women want a man wants a woman that's already put together so he ain't got to do nothing, but he wants us to wait for us. Want us to wait for them to get together. And then on the other end of that polarity, you got women saying, well, men saying it on one end in their counterpart aspect, and then you got women saying it on the other end. Both of y'all sound like fucking little kids. You sound like 10-year-old children. You sound like a little kid. Even though you in your 30s and you grown, have you grown emotionally? Have you grown physically? Have you grown emotionally? What is your emotional growth looking like? What is your physical? What is your outside of the physical aspect? Your emotional, your spiritual, your energy. What are these growths looking like? What is your balance like? These are things that you got to really look into. These are things that we really got to start dissecting and looking into in order to understand why this turn of events is the way that it is. It just didn't happen. It's coming from a corresponding cause. You acting off of effects, so you're reactive. So you create this effect, it becomes your new cause, and then you live off that effect. Pretty soon, you go all the way down the line, and then you're like, God damn, nigga, I didn't know that shit was gonna be like that. It's then changed into this. Think about the aspects of what I just said about side chicks and motherfuckers talking about polygamy. In order for that to exist, everybody has to accept that aspect. But you're accepting the intellectual aspect. What you're accepting actually is a byproduct of a byproduct. Because polygamy and multiple wives and what you call it, that is the physical manifestation of our cultures. But there's something before that based upon the energy. Until you understand what the energy is, you don't understand why that came together in the first place. Why they have statues of Ganesh and Shiva knocking off and running trains on chicks. You still stuck on the human factor. But that's all based upon the gematria. That's all based upon the numbers in the gematria. And just like you can go through astrology and whatever other key that it may be, that's what it is. This is the physical aspect of it. That is the discipline within the physical. Expanding your mind through the physical act to unlock your mind to the new level. Actually applying the knowledge. Not just play acting like you got the knowledge. Like, yeah, man, like, you know, in our culture, you know, like, we're supposed to have multiple wives. In our culture, we're supposed to have multiple families because it might do. If that works for you, it works for you. But even with that, you still got to do it from a space of being healed. You got to you got to acknowledge those traumas so you ain't bleeding them traumas. You ain't taking those same traumas and those same activated points, neurological points, into the minds of the new generation. Because they now have something that they got to deal with. Because you didn't deal with it then, they got to deal with it now. It's like passing the thing along. And nobody want to accept it. It goes into that aspect when you think about that narrative of, I've been working since I was 16 years old. So I didn't cry. We didn't have time to cry. We didn't have time to do that. I was working since 16 years old. So think about somebody that started working at 16 years old. Just think about these are key points in understanding this shit. Think about somebody that started working at 16 years old back in the 50s, 60s. Now think about that same rhythm and pattern being applied to this era of 16 and 17 year olds. So now in that space, you've been working since you were 16. So now in the next space, in the next effect, within that corresponding, since you've been working since you were 16 and taking care of a house since you were 16, that means in the next space, somebody gonna get pregnant. Now there's kids born at 14, 15, and 16. Why? Because they started working at 14, 15, and 16. They started heading a household. That's the new corresponding effect to the original cause. So imagine if you come up to this space and then, so that happens, and now that 16-year-old mindset, now that comes forward, and then you got the 16-year-olds, they having kids earlier, so now they don't have a chance to actually experience life, so then they wild out in their later on years, have a kid of their own, but then the urge within that space wasn't even dealt with. So then what happens next? Now let's go back again. Now look at the aspects of the raping, the pillaging, and all these things people want to put out there. Those are unhealed aspects that are being carried through that same narrative. Those are unhealed aspects moving through that same narrative. So think about what's going to happen next. This is forcing us to think in a fashion of how, not thinking in the fashion of what. By accepting this information, by accepting this type of information into our minds, we start to change the narrative. When we start applying this information and these thought processes, we start changing the physical manifestation of that narrative. So now we create new causes and we create new effects. But these new causes are coming from a space of being healed. So the new effects are going to naturally correspond with a space of being healed. You can't take being traumatized when you were 10. A trauma happening when you were 10 and then come to age 30 and express what you want, because what you're going to get it through the trauma. A lot of these relationships nowadays are based upon those unhealed traumas. And it's not nothing new. It's just been happening. The energy just becomes so strong in that kinetic pulse that it's easier to achieve. So you can think about back in the day, everybody was getting married. Now you think about a moment like now, nobody's getting married. That's not a fucking coincidence. That's based on the kinetic pulse of that energy from the beginning. You went from a space to where you stayed together because of a trauma. You stayed together because of an issue or whatever it may be on these traditional values. You come to a space where you don't have to acquire that value. That value was forgotten. That value of that variable was forgotten or not ascertained and retransmuted through aspect are healed. So then you come to a new space and then you see what you see then. Now you got niggas in jail and all these aspects coming into play. And then you come to this space and now it's easy to acquire it. It's all based upon that same fucking narrative. Being unhealed. It's the unhealed aspect. You got men out here that are in their fucking 50s that are stuck in the age of 16. You got women out here that are in the age of their early 30s. Hell, you got chicks in their mid-20s that look 32. Based upon an unhealed aspect. Acting in the narrative of a 12-year-old because they did not reach a certain stage of development before the trauma arose. And since they can get more based off expressing their trauma and there's no aspect of healing on it, it's like love and hip-hop, motherfuckers love the conflict. The natural rhythm for us is to love conflict anyway and chaos. But if we accept chaos and we like the chaos based upon an unhealed perspective, the unhealed original unhealed. If we accept chaos based on unhealed causes and not acknowledging those causes, what do you think the effects are gonna be? It's just crazy. It's just a crazy perspective to actually just start looking at it that way. Understanding the aspects of what need to be healed and understanding how that shit transmutes through the pain. It's very easy for somebody to transmute through pain of being hurt. They'll transmute all of their pain, all of their insecurities, all of their internal problems and issues that are going on inside of their life. They're going to transmute through that one portal. They're going to transfer all that through that one portal. And in working with people on those issues, it's like, wow, you never really think of how deep that shit really goes, how deep it really is for that shit to actually be worked on. It's crazy just being in a position to actually see that and actually provide the aspects of healing in it. Being a healer in that aspect in that space, in this scape, is different because it takes a lot of healing for myself. And there's some things that even when I'm dealing with a client, that sometimes I sit back and I think about it. But the way I think about it is like, damn, I never saw it from that angle before. So it gives me another parallel to fix to destroy a pattern and create a new one. That's one of those keys in that shit. So it's just gonna be a deep one. Yeah. But that's gonna lead us into the aspect we don't merge these together. The first half of that 10 going on 30. You really have to acknowledge those. We're gonna close this segment out. Those aspects of dealing with the trauma, really sitting down. If you can't sit down, if you feel like you're not strong enough to sit down by yourself, sit down with somebody, call up me, get into the aspects of a healer, somebody that's going to listen and actually allow you to bring that shit to the surface, because that's going to be one of those keys to take you out of that mindset. So you stop thinking that you're grown and you actually embrace your growth. Because a lot of people embrace their growth, embrace that they're saying that they're grown and not understanding that you're always growing. I'm still growing. I'm still growing mentally. I'm still growing spiritually. Every single minute of this context of the day, of every moment of the day, I learn something new. Even when I do a podcast episode, the notes that I go over, when I start saying them, start putting them on the thing, it's like, damn, I never even thought about some shit like that. Maybe I need to sit back. And that was an earlier podcast episode. I'm always relearning and rearranging my mind based on everything that I say, based on the information I take in. And that's one of the keys of understanding that you're growing. That immature mindset to have you thinking that you're grown. That immature mindset to have you thinking that the status quo of why you saying that you're grown makes you grown. So you'll be sitting there literally in your mindset thinking just because you're paying bills and surviving by paying bills, and you're surviving by you got a place to stay and you got all these things, you start acquiring things to fit the identity or that initiative, but you're simply a 10-year-old with a license. You're a 10-year-old with a car. Some people, you're a 10-year-old with a car and a house. So you basically playing house, you're playing drive, you're playing work, you're playing married. And this is some of the aspects of what you're doing. Like when you start playing these things, and then this is also when you look at motherfuckers that shack up for like 20, 10, 12, 11 years, because they have not achieved a level of healing to actually embrace or embark on the next level. You have not, some people haven't embraced a level of healing to go to the next level. Where that's at. They want to bring it to where they at now. That's one of those keys. People want to bring it to where they at now. And as I always say about this shit with this frequency, at this point in time, when you set that boundary based on your new parameters, based on those healed standards from an aspect of being healed, you can't allow individuals to take you off your frequency. You can't allow others to take you into a lower frequency in order to receive something. They got to come up here. If they cannot embrace that body of light, it's time to leave them where the fuck they at. Because that's when you're going to start seeing that separation of seeing how that's that childhood mentality. That's the child mindset stuck within that space. There's something that they got to deal with. There's something that's within their present infrastructure. There's something in their present infrastructure that's feeding off of that trauma. And until that present infrastructure is allowed to be broken, they won't go back to that space. It's like my uncle always used to tell me, was like, some people got to go through some hard ass shit in order for them to actually grow. Some people actually gotta go through that situation where they ain't got no money, when they ain't got no place to stay, they ain't got no ride. Some people actually gotta go through that aspect to accept where they're actually at and how they caused it. So even then I was learning about reflections. Some people gotta understand that shit. There's people in your life right now, guaranteed, that are going through some shit that just because you're there, they don't want to, they're not going to grow. Just because you're always in the position of where you're at, they don't want to grow. They're not going to expound past that level because why? You're going to keep coming back over into their space. You're going to keep helping them. You're going to keep hindering them. You're going to keep this state of self-sabotaging yourself so they exist. And that's one of the biggest things. Maturity is actually the intimacy with your growing. And maturity is understanding that you have not fully grown. And the experiences are going to further help you grow. Further. Go into growing. This expands you into that gnosis, aka that knowing. Yeah, we don't get into the closeout for this first segment. I'm pretty sure something else gonna pop up, but we don't get into this next segment after this. All right, we back. Second part of our session. We're gonna get into the aspects of perspective and projection. Growing beyond the old sights and to learn new vision. The main aspect when we talking about that 10 going into 30, healing from the childhood traumas. And we're going to get deeper into this throughout the week. That's that preamble. We're going to get deep into it on Friday. Understanding the childhood traumas, those neural pathways, those transmitters, those algorithms, all of these aspects go into that. Basically the formula and the principle. This changes our perspective. So if I'm coming from the perspective of being unhealed, the unhealed narrative, there's a childhood trauma, something happened to me, I didn't have a father, I didn't have a mother, or the mother I had didn't show me nurturing, the father that I had didn't give me, the father figure that was in my life didn't give me the aspect of knowledge and the ability to, since they were coming from a broken space of not being nurtured, they didn't give me the space to nurture that knowledge. And in the mother, not coming from a space of true knowledge, doesn't give me the space to truly nurture it. We see this a lot of time when we see the overprotective mother or the overprotective father complex. That projection that comes out of it is that sheltering. This becomes that sheltering aspect. So growing past those old sites of being sheltered within a certain confine of a lack of nurturing or lack of nurturing, a lack of knowledge, breaking that old narrative and coming into this space, we learn how to create based on new vision. So this is a big thing when people that have kids. This is a big thing for the ones that have kids, nieces, nephews, or kids that are around them in their life. You're going to notice that the main healing aspect is your perspective and how you start projecting it. So if I'm coming from an unhealed space where women weren't nothing, women were nothing but just play toys, playthings or whatever, then the way that I'm going to show my son in that perspective, you would show your son is in that same projective, in that you will project what your perspective is based upon that unhealed space. So you're going to treat them as that. You're going to use there's an old saying there's parents teaching their kids to live in a world that no longer exists. Parents are showing their kids, are raising their kids for a world that no longer exists. So when we take that into the aspect of the projection, what are you projecting? Based on your perspective, what are you projecting? Projection is the aspect of, simply put, if my perspective is always anger, being sad, being depressed, then I'm always going to project in a manner that is either hiding the emotion or hiding the conflict, or I'm either hiding the conflict, that means I'm underbalanced, I'm undercharged, or I'm over compensating, or I'm either over showing the emotion. That means my whatever chakra that is in alignment with your power, your sacral and your power chakra, your root, your sacral and your solar chakras. Think about how you're doing it. So if you're in a state of you're rooted in surviving based off of hatred for men, hatred for women, hatred for the white man, hatred for whatever it may be, then you're always going to be confident when you find, because basically you're going to create that reflection, or that you're going to project the finding for accepting, you see, I told you white men and white people ain't shit, because you're projecting from that space. So you're literally, your perspective rooted within, since you're rooted within that perspective from an unhealed aspect, guess what? You're always going to project and put that out there. You're always going to find something wrong with something. Look and you shall find. So think about that. Your corresponding thought creates the corresponding physical manifestation. So as long as you think it, it's going to always keep coming up. That's what you're going to keep projecting from. And then when you don't see it, or if you see something that is outside of that spectrum, you can't accept it. You're always going to have this sense of paranoia with yourself. You're always going to be like, he's too good to me. Something got to be wrong with him. Something got to be wrong. And then you're going to create something to be wrong with them. And then they become that reflection, because that's what you need in your life for you to survive. That's why whenever people come into healthy relationships, when you come into a healthy space and a healthy relationship with yourself, until you come into a healthy relationship with yourself, you will not be able to accept a healthy relationship. You will always project from the unhealthy aspect. So if somebody has a level of healing, they've healed themselves, they're speaking with you differently, they're listening to you, they're not allowing you to be negative, they're not allowing you to be negative and carry on the negative narrative and the negative aspects of yourself, you're going to feel attacked. Most people, whenever they meet people that are in another space, they feel like they're not smart enough. You ever felt like you weren't smart enough? You ever felt like you weren't good enough? Where do you think that perspective comes from? It just didn't pop up. It came from a space where the fuck you were at before. So every time that shows up within your shadow work, it's time to address it. At this point in time, it's time to address it. So if you never felt good enough, and it was based on this narrative that you created in your mind that your father wasn't in your life, or the fraternal figure that was in your life didn't give you the space so you could actually grow, then what do you think you're going to attract in a male counterpart, a male masculine mate? You're going to attract from the perspective, your projected aspects into that individual. If they don't fit that perspective that you built for yourself, then you automatically always gonna look at it like, nah, that ain't what I want. That ain't the type of man that I want. He's too nice. He's too weak. He's too nice. It happens because of the over aspect, but that goes into the same correspondence of somebody being over nurtured without any knowledge. They were over nurtured, which means they were sheltered. You can either be given too much knowledge and build a superiority complex, or you can be given too much nurturing, and this is the development of the passive aggressive complex. So we look at the passive aggressive complex and the aggressive passive complexes. My mother is passive aggressive. My pops is aggressively passive. Those are their complexes. So my mother will be passive, but be set to the tone of aggression. So she'll apologize in an aggressive manner if she doesn't get her way. And my pops, he'll come in an aggressive manner, and if he doesn't get his way, he responds in a passive manner. So looking at those two aspects, my perspective, based upon not dealing with that, would be of the either being overly aggressive or overly passive. Now, at both points in time in my life, I was overly aggressive, and at other points in my life, I was overly passive. So my perspective was coming from that space. So when I dealt with the feminine aspects, I was sometimes overly aggressive in certain narratives. I was trying to get my point across or trying to say certain things, but since I didn't learn the aspect of nurturing and I was acting from the wounded masculine complex, that's what I kept perceiving. That's what I kept projecting, because I saw my mother being passive. So that was the accepted aspect. So for somebody in that role or in that narrative, this is where you get, I want my woman to cook and clean and do what I say. That's from the matriarchal, and you go back, you understand that we came from a matriarchal, now we're in a patriarchal, so you didn't see how that's now in front of you in your environment based upon that corresponding cause. So for me, in my space where I was at, I would see this constantly all the time. I would see my mother be passive aggressive, and then I would also see my mom switch that passive aggressive nature to get her way. So then my pops would act in an aggressive passive manner. I remember one time in particular, I was back down here working at a grocery store up the street from the house. And at no point in time did my mother say I was supposed to be helping her pay bills at the house. My mother never had the conversation with me. My pops and my mom had the conversation, but the conversation was never brought to me. So at that point, I remember I was just getting off work. I was I was in my room, getting undressed. That's how I think I was on lunch break. And I was in my room, and I just got my check. No, I got off work. It was late that night. I just got off work late. Nice little walk to the house. Just got off work late. And I remember I was getting undressed. It was during the weekend. It was like a Friday. Yeah, I was getting off. And I was getting undressed, and I was about to go take a shower. And I remember my pops busted in my room. And he asked me a question about, you supposed to be giving your mother some money? So it was the passive tone. I was like, no, didn't hear nothing about that. Pops walks back out. Goes in and asks my mom. This is when my super sensitive hearing was kicking in at this age, around 16. And my mother had said I did. Instead of now the more logical reason of bringing me in the room to have the conversation, wasn't even thinking that far. I was tired, ready to go to bed. I was going to take a shower in the morning. Pops came back in there and said, you owe your mama some money for the electric bill. I was like, okay. Though I did not hear about this. And then my pops goes into the aggressive narrative of himself and starts talking about, I can buy shoes and clothes and all this stuff, but you can't help your mother with no bills. Later on that morning, that Saturday morning, I woke up, went in the room, I went into the kitchen. My mom was cooking breakfast, and my mom activated her passive aspect. He didn't have to come in and say that to you. I like, this is the first time I said you didn't have to lie. You didn't have to lie, because I was reeling after that shit. It was just, this is based on the aspect of, remember I've said that when I was 12, met my father and all these aspects. I met other aspects that came into this space. So I was still, that was where I was activated from. I said, you didn't have to lie like you've lied before. And then this is when my mom's aggressive nature kicked in. Long story short, I mean, I still get my mother the money, but think about how that transmutes into your future aspects. So I remember being 19, and I remember being, about 19. This is after college, after that year in locked away for that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. And I remember I met my first real relationship that became my fiance. And I remember being overly passive. My nonchalant attitude, my natural nonchalant, detached from nature aspect was being corresponded. The energy that was corresponding and feeding it was the passive aggressive nature that I learned from that space. I always said to myself, I don't want to be nothing like this man. But I didn't have a gauge to gauge why he was like that. It wasn't until actually about 4 years ago when me and my pops actually had a conversation, and he told me about not ever meeting his mother. So that was that aspect. He told me about the aspect of never meeting his mother, his grandmother, his pop's father. Basically, my pops was sending the money for him, but she was having him sign the back of his checks, and he was never seeing the money. So in that space, as I was coming into my healed aspects of having that conversation, my perspective of my pops had changed, because I only knew him from one side of the spectrum. I only knew him from one side. I didn't know the causes. All I knew was the effects. So once I started understanding the effects, my entire way that I viewed my father had changed. My pops had changed. Now, with my father in hand, I learned both sides of my father, so that became my gauge. The more that I healed, I was able to use that gauge. This is the aspect of understanding these. This is an example of using that new perspective. When your perspective changes, your projections change. So if you're projecting from an aspect of you've always been hurt and whatever it may be, then your projection is always going to be the one to fill that void. You have to be hurt in some way. You need that type of trauma in your life. You need that attention. So you start creating those reflections that are based on that intention. So then you're sitting there like, oh my God. So when you start meeting the healthier aspects of somebody that's in health, you don't know how to deal with it, because your perspective is they got to be hiding something, because you saw people being nice to you and they were hiding something or wanted something from you. So then you start thinking based on that, and you start projecting from that manner. Your attitude, your behavior, how you deal with conversations, how you have conversations. All of these things get tied up within that aspect of that algorithm. So now you create based on the algorithm. until it gets challenged. It gets challenged enough, it's going to shatter. It's going to break. That old infrastructure, your old paradigm of your old thoughts are going to be broken. But you'll need to allow it to happen. But this changes and gives you the new aspect of view. A lot of times we come into this space, we come into a space where we are in our adulthood, perceived adulthood, and we have not learned the factors that are needed to sustain that space, to become into an energy. Me, I've always been very big on energy. So one of my recent things for myself is my perspective of investing is like an all-inclusive thought process. I treat the world around me like it's business because that's the easiest way for me to understand it. I nurture it as a business. I treat it as a business mindset. The portfolio, the prospectus, the mergers, the returns on my investments. I treat it in that narrative in some cases in my life. So as I learn based on this narrative, where did I get this narrative from or this perspective? I got it from my pops. So I understood now my pops, and like most black men, will speak on the aspects of business, but they won't give you a building block because they didn't learn it. So this becomes one of those aspects in understanding. This is one of the harder things that I had to understand and deal with, because I was building the external state of being based on the perspective of money. So I felt I needed to have this. And this is just for most people. Like, you feel like you need this much money. You feel like you need this car. You feel like you need this place. You feel like you need this list of things to be able to say, okay, yeah, well, this is how we can be together because I have all of these things. But then what if you don't have it? Then you feel like you have no worth, because you're basing your value, you're basing your abundance, you're basing your prosperity, you're basing your entire structure on an external or the byproducts of what it is to truly have the energy. This is another aspect that within that perspective, this is how we view things. So we project from that narrative. This goes right into the aspect of going from the man worked and the woman stayed home and took care of this. And then the black woman started going to college and getting jobs in corporate America, or doing a job in corporate America. And then the men started sitting back based on being over nurtured, and then the women being under nurtured, because you look at a single parent household in that traditional format based on a perspective, you can look and see the son is coddled, but the woman or the girl was taught to be hardened. She was given the aspects of being hardened so she didn't have to depend on a man. And the boy was never given the aspects of how to actually be the man. So think about that perspective when you think about from that 10 to 30. Think about this aspect whenever you're creating based on your perspective of being hurt. You don't need no man. Think about every time that you say this, there's a difference between independence and self-sufficiency. Remember, independence is the aspect you need something to be dependent upon you. Self-sufficient means you know how to work from both. You know how to work from both sides of that coin. So self-sufficiency is what would build a family unit. Independence is going to continue. That narrative of independence is going to continue building the single parent household. That's something to really, really think about when you start thinking about these perspectives and giving yourself that new view. Understanding how your traumas now translate and bring that correspondence into that new space. This is how you start shifting that narrative. This is how you start healing in that narrative. It's a lot deeper. There's a lot more parts to it, but we have to have this overall synopsis in order to begin the aspects of healing. We have to have this overall synopsis in order to begin the healing. That way we can instill the new foundation and instill building upon that new foundation. You can't get it from the past. You can't say my grandmother and grandfather were together for 62 years, because the narrative that fits within that paradigm no longer can survive in this paradigm, because everything that wasn't dealt with or held in, like you remember, like you weren't shown to show emotion in this aspect, and a woman was a woman was allowed to be not allowed to, and so that would cause he's not allowed to show emotion, so she didn't have no one to pour emotion into, so she can't nurture and she can't gain any knowledge. So you think how that correspondence comes to this space. Now you got beautiful queens out here. As beautiful as they are, they hurt on the inside. You got fucking phenomenal brothers out here, but for the most part, they hurt inside. So think about their projection. I remember I made the joke when I was little. I was like, I had the thought, I was like, why don't the bad people stay with the bad people and the good people stay with the good people? And I remember I always used to say it, but I never had an answer for myself. But then I remember I would get like bits and pieces, and I formulated an answer later on in life. And I was like, who would want to look at a reflection of themselves? And this goes into the aspect of, it doesn't matter who loves you. It doesn't matter who trusts you. Do you trust yourself? Because until you trust yourself, your perspective is going to be based on somebody trusting you. So your projection is always looking for a reason for somebody to find distrust in somebody. If you don't love yourself from that perspective, your new projection is going to try to find somebody that's going to love you, because you don't value or you can't validate yourself. So you would depend on the external validation. You depend on the external state of being giving you the status quo of what love is. You can't be happy until you can't find happiness until you happy yourself. You can't find that soulmate, as people would say. You don't keep finding karmic partners. You don't keep finding karmic partners. You don't keep finding twin flames, the ones that's supposed to be showing you some shit. And until you acknowledge that you gotta learn some shit, and you ain't perfect, because the only thing perfect is the aspect of death. Until you admit that you are a nice, cool 7.5, you feel me? You ain't gonna have the points to step up, because you're gonna feel like you don't have to change anything. I've never called any female a fucking 10. I'm never gonna call any female a fucking 10, because that is an outlandish aspect that shows that you don't have to do anything. And that's a period, point blank. I'm not gonna spew that type of toxic narrative. Girl, you a 10. Why am I a 10? Because your hair done, your nails done. Because usually when motherfuckers say someone's a fucking 10, in reality, they call them a fucking 10. It's on some physical shit, for most part. I wouldn't even call a fully healed spiritual goddess a 10. She can be a 10 at that, in that space, she can be a 10 at that level. But even in that aspect of correspondence, she's not even a 10 at being a goddess. Because she's a 10 at being a goddess, that means she's ready to go to the next level. That means she's accepting the challenges of the next level. That's the only time you can become a 10. Technically, it would be a 9, because, 9 equates and goes to 0, then you start over. So there's no such thing as being a 10. You can be a 9 at the highest, but then you got to be prepared to go to the next level. And that's one of those big ass perspectives that a lot of motherfuckers don't want to do. Especially when it comes to the terms of finding that one, getting married, having kids, and you activating that at fucking 5. You got to be real with yourself. You got to change your perspective of yourself because you're projecting the false narrative. You're projecting the falseness of yourself. That's why you thinking that in your mind you are a 10. I'll use that as an example. In your mind you are a 10. That means in order for you to find something, to project the reflection of something, they have to be at a 10. So you stuck in that negative ass algorithm, you gonna meet perfect fucking 10 bum niggas. You gonna meet perfect 10 bum bitches. Just gotta be real with that shit. You gonna meet someone that does not challenge you. You gonna meet somebody that, yeah, y'all paying bills and y'all going on trips. But remember, that shit fade. What happened when y'all 50, 60 years old? Just think about it. You chasing the world. You chasing everything that's within the world. But we don't go into this break. We don't finish this one off. And then we don't get into the aspect of existing or resisting. I like that opening music to this. Just that third and final segment to this week's session. Wanted to get into the aspects of existing or resisting. There's a reason I said existing or resisting and not existing and not living. This space in correspondence, that curious case of our correspondences. Sometimes we rather exist in the perspectives or perceptions within our perspective and project from that space and live in that or exist within that mold or exist within that negative. And when it comes time to actually live in the now, we resist. Our minds will go either to the surface of the past or to the thought process of the near future. This is the aspect of time. Not having the knowledge or taking in the aspects of the knowledge, we allow ourselves to kind of teeter. We allow ourselves to teeter. We allow ourselves to stay within that space, that mind frame of what I wanted since I was 13, I want now. That dream house, dream wedding, that dream wife, the dream job or whatever, we still activate in existing based on that identity. An example of that for myself was I literally thought that I really didn't know what I wanted to do until after college and psychology and shit. I didn't know that I was going to be a psychologist now, be a professional, actual healer into this aspect using psychology and occult studies. So I didn't know that. I'm glad that I am, but I didn't know. I was pretty much under the perspective that I was going to literally be a restaurateur of some sort. Because I was like, nigga, I can cook real good. I mean, I can chef up some fucking delightful dishes. I can run a restaurant. I mean, I've done that shit before. Like, I mastered that. But it was always this sense of emptiness. It was always me simply existing. So what I came to find out was when I was bucking against it or I would lose a job, a small part of me that kept growing throughout my works throughout my life was, do I really want to go back? Because I remember every single time that I lost a job, it took me no longer. I think the longest time it took me to find a job was 10 days. I was always able to find a job. No problem. I think, my longest time was 10 days. The time after that was about a month. It took me a month to find another job with my last place of employment. It took me about 30 days. But I was going through a whole bunch of shit. And I started looking at those 30 days. I was like, yo, them 30 days are in reflection to my 30-day fast before I went to doing everything it is that I do now. And it was crazy. I was like, yo, that shit cool. Wow. So this takes us into the aspect of existing. And I want to use the example of time. If you look at a relationship, let's say you've been in a relationship for about longer than 7 years. You've been in a relationship for about 10 years. 10, 12, 15, 20 years. Half of that relationship, the first, we'll say 5 years. Let's look at the first 5 years of your relationship. The first 5 years of that, no. If we don't say 10, we don't say the first 5 years of your relationship, splitting that in half. So the first 2.5 years of your relationship, I love breaking down numbers. The first 2.5 years of your relationship was establishing through trauma. Think about that. If you are in a relationship and it's not based on a healed narrative, then the first 2.5 years of your relationship were used to establish the bond through trauma. Think about the conversations you had in the beginning of your relationship. Think about the things that you talked about. Think about the things that were within that conversation. Really think about that. Most of your conversations that are happening, most conversations based on trauma bonds are conversations about survival. It's conversations about dealing. It's conversations about tolerating. You set this tone like, I only tolerate this. I'm only going to tolerate this once. I'm going to do this and this and this. You spend that first 2.5 years of your relationship reinforcing and establishing the bond through the trauma. So So that's the first 2.5 years. The second 2.5 years, you're going to be establishing everything through that trauma. So that's 5 years. So the next 5 years is just going to be repeats of the original cause and effect. So now you in a space right now and you like, damn, I've been with them for this many years. By this narrative, I should be this, this, and this. Based on the external status quo, we should be this, this, and this. This can even go into a relationship. This is an ongoing, evolved aspect of a relationship goal. When we think about these relationship goals and existing, and I treat it just like I told you like last week, we treated like that healed LLC. When you start thinking in this narrative or thinking in this space, you like, yo, we got to do it this way, and this way, and I should be this, this, and this. What have you done? Ask yourself this real life question. What have you done to deserve that or earn that? Other than the status quo or the normal shit that motherfuckers like, the shit that we've made normal, what have you truly earned? This is the aspect of existing. existing based on a timeline based on your identity. But if your identity is in question, you're questioning everything about your identity, how you came up and how you lived and all this shit. Really think about, would you hire you? Would you marry yourself? Would you give yourself a loan? Really think about that to yourself. Do you have the knowledge that goes along with the aspects of a loan? Do you have the knowledge in itself and happiness within yourself to create within a space from a space of happiness? Last week when I said the thing about rejection, that this is the way I am is not the clearest way to come into a relationship. Saying this is the way I am, anything that challenges the way you are, you're basically going to resist it so you continue existing. Don't nobody want to exist in a space like that. This is when I said earlier, like, you're looking for the aspects as you're going through your healing process. You're going to automatically go from the what to think based on, I took my time building up so I can tolerate this person building up, and they'll be building up for me, so then I'll have a sense of ownership. Because that's basically what you're saying. When you coming from a heal compassionary aspect, you automatically look for others to build with. You look for people to build with. You look for people that are on that level where you're at. You don't farscape yourself past the parameters of your own self. Because this is the aspect that comes into the existing within the accepting of actually setting boundaries. I remember one thing my pops always said to my mother. He did not like my aunts, but it was the way my aunts treated, like based on the stories that my mom's told my pops about my aunts, her sisters, and how they treated her when she was younger. That's all my pops had to go off of. So of course, when they started asking for money and needing shit, and my mom going around him all the time, the narrative was never healthy because that's all he had to go off of. Her aspect. So he resisted anything that could but on the other end of that, he resisted the aspects of actually acquiring anything for her to live in. And it was partially based on the balance of my mother. My mother was what we thought at that age was not having a car was my pops didn't just want to go get a car. But I remember my pops had said, do you want a house or do you want to live in a car? And I remember my mother was always like, my mother always had this long algorithm of existing saying she had money or she had this whatever it may be. But she was resisting the actual factoid that she didn't have what she said that she had. She built this case on what was that age-old narrative, what's yours is mine and what's mine is yours. So she never, ever was able to build the working aspect. My mother came from a space where she was always told she was sick. My mother has epilepsy. She got epilepsy after going to the doctor and being prescribed the wrong medication, and then it led to her epilepsy. So my mother was always in a space that she thought she was sick, so she never could work. So even my mother did come into the aspects of actually working, that was her go-to. She was happy existing within that old confine. So she was happy existing within the space of what she was getting. So she was happy with the old narrative. So when she wanted to change the narrative, it was going to require her to resist falling back into the old perspectives. This is that main major key that a lot of us do when it comes time to actually start living. Right now, I'm living. I get to sit back once a week and deliver this light to y'all. Once a week, drop the light. Now, after this drops at 7 p.m., I get to do some reading. I do readings and go further into the information. Fridays, I get to do a lecture, and throughout the week, I'm doing consultations and sessions. I'm literally living. I get to sit here. I got a skull cane. I got a cane with a big skull on the top, and I got 3 skulls under the bottom. I get to sit here with my cane and give y'all this information. I'm no longer resisting the needs. I'm no longer resisting the requirements to create what I desire. When we start no longer resisting the requirements that it takes to actually grow into what we desire, everything changes. Everything shifts. Because now, what you were doing based on the existing in your identity is now going to be the thing that's going to compete with living in your own reality, creating your own space. And this is when I break down talking about acknowledging that 10-year-old going on 30, that I'm 10 years old, traumatized, but I'm 30-year-old grown. This is the aspect when I'm talking about your old perspective and what it projects from that old perspective is really going to be challenged by you resisting the urge to stay in it. Resisting the urge to set the boundary so you can actually start applying all your new energy. It's one thing, once again, to learn all this shit. It's one thing to learn everything. Like, yeah, man, I learned that the pyramids was built by us and all this shit was built by us. But none of that has nothing to do until you actually start applying the basic laws and understanding how they work within your life. A lot of us get stuck in the existence because we're not living by the laws. You exist within the creations of those laws, but in order to create based upon those laws, you have to go into the chaos outside of what you existed in. In order for you to actually start using and applying the formulas and creating with the new laws, you gotta allow the old things that you existed in based upon the creation based by those laws. Stop chasing the fucking world. Stop chasing the fucking money. Stop chasing shit. Literally, I sit here and deliver the messages, the downloads, the channels, the years of study. I deliver it by the podcast, Meditate and Elevate, the videos and the other content that I put out, the lectures that I do, the sessions that I lead, the classes that I'm starting to teach. That's me literally not having to go anywhere for anything because everything is in alignment with me. What comes up is the shit that I gotta deal with. I have to resist that urge to fight to exist. That is the key when you come into your aspects of you healing yourself. You stop resisting the urge of fighting to exist. Just die. Let it die already. Allow that shit to be laid on that concrete slab so you can do the obituary, do the autopsy. I said that back in Divorcing from Humanity. Allow your old self to lay on that damn slab so you can actually do the autopsy. Take out what you need to take out, study what you need to study, and then that hole that you can't get past, that hole that's always going to be there, throw the body in there. Not only throwing that body in there, but everything that was connected to that old body. Because that body's now obsolete. That means every reflection that was in that old environment is now obsolete. It ain't going to help you up here. You can sit back every single day and wish and hope and pray and all that shit and hope and wish. But if you ain't applying the fucking work, you simply resisting the inevitable. You going to repeat. A lot of people are coming back with baby brain. But it ain't for me to say it out loud to them. Because that'll hurt their fucking feelings. But then I don't care about feelings. I have the compassion of knowing how to say it to them. That's another major key when you start living. When you start living, when you're truly living in the space that you're supposed to be living in, that bluntness comes less from being blunt, forced from trauma, and it becomes blunt from a state of matter-of-factly. Yeah, I saw that from my brother Panic lecture. I ain't gonna lie. You start speaking matter-of-factly. You start speaking in a tone and in a convincing manner that is based upon your truth. Because you living within the aspects. I had a conversation with myself in a dream. And I was talking to myself, and I was having a conversation with some old aspects of myself, actually. And I was telling them that there's no excuse for me to there's no excuse for damn near anything. And I truly move in the knowledge of knowing there's no excuse for damn near anything. And the main thing I was explaining to myself in my dream was, I was having that pep talk with myself. I was like, I went from Mondays doing everything from the music to the videos to writing up the treatment to basically from about 7 o'clock in the morning till about, I'll say 10, 11 o'clock at night. I spent most of my time putting together the podcast all on a Monday. Everything from the music to the treatment to the notes, everything. I spent an entire Monday putting together the aspect, putting together the work. The main reason that I had to do it was because I was at a job. But the reason that I was able to do it was my key. The reason I was able to do it is because I was already setting the mindset and shifting my mind out of resisting, fighting myself. And I actually gave into, little nigga, you have to put this work in. You have to stop creating the excuses for yourself. And I remember putting out a whole podcast on a Monday. I remember waking up Monday mornings. I remember waking up Monday around 7 a.m. And all day sitting here in the living room putting together the podcast. I remember doing that shit every fucking Monday. I did put so much into that I had to make sure it was proofed, mastered, edited. Everything was done by 11 o'clock. Because at 5 o'clock a.m. I had to wake up to get ready to hop on a bus and head my ass to work. So I dropped the podcast. I head to work. I get to work at like 7:15 after going by the Walmart up the street from my job. And I remember sitting outside like, yo, all this time I could actually be spending promoting the podcast. That was like, why can't I promote the podcast right now? I'm still doing God Thoughts. Get live on Facebook. Give out a motivation, give out that positive message. Give out that message. And I say tune into the podcast. Get off work on a Tuesday, get off work, come to the house, look at how it was running. I was probably getting like 9 plays a week. Now I'm getting like 9 plays a day. Then I got up to the point of getting like 9 plays a day, 10 plays a day, and then it was going up. I'm still not where I desire to be, but the quality of what I'm putting out for the ones that are getting it, and this is another thing that you got to switch out of. The amount of people that are listening to it or are getting the information, they're the ones that are meant to get the information. As long as I keep that programmed in my mindset, when it goes up, it's not something I'm like, ooh, shit. Like, of course I get excited because I put my work into the quality, but it doesn't change my quality. A lot of the times when we come into resisting the change, resisting actually living, it's that aspect of, in order to get something, we kind of shoot ourselves short of our quality. We tend to shoot our worth down the drain. We don't put our true worth into our work. And that's one of those big ass factors for a lot of people, that we start sitting there and we start putting our work in, but then we start becoming the villain to our works and to put out more quality. So I could sit here easily and put out a 20-minute podcast one time every day. I can put out a 20-minute podcast today, put out another one on Wednesday, and put out another one on Friday. Spread the information. But I have other things built into those days. So I use that same algorithm and formula into where I spent my Monday putting together everything. I'm bringing everything from Saturday when I'm sitting here working on music and putting together the treatment. Sunday when I'm finishing up the music and finishing the videos, the main videos. That leaves me all the time on Monday to focus on perfecting my notes, making sure all the music's lined up. I can now punch in, at a certain time I can punch in all the information that I need to punch in: the Grand Rising, the God Thought, the weekly reading, the plug talk. Get those already set up. And then any sponsorships aspects in there that we're now going through now. And then I can work on the episode. So I can start working on the episode at 4 in the afternoon. Actually working on the episode. And then put together that body of work. But while I'm sitting there in that space, now I can on a Saturday and a Sunday, as I readjust my seat, on a Saturday and Sunday, I can literally put out the next podcast episode and the information about the next podcast episode. If I wanted to drop a video on Sunday, I can. I have that option because I'm making the music at that point in time. This is the aspect of truly living within your purpose and living within yourself, living within your space. I set my boundaries and parameters, so I'm always the aspect of always moving and always working. I'm always producing something. I'm always creating something. In order for me to become more open to creating things, I have to take myself out of the aspect of trying to get a quantity out and worry about my quality. The quantity is easy the content's easy to the content is easy to duplicate and split up and based on the quality. It's like taking the quality of that 100% Bolivian and not having to cut it up. If I have to cut it up, I'm cutting up pure. Because in honesty, wouldn't you rather have a percentage? If I take 100% pure and break that down into fours, so that's 50%, that's 25% of the 100% pure. And then take that 25, whoa. Take that, have that, make it 50%, break it down and turn it into 25% from the pure. It's still 100% pure, but it's just 25% of the 100% pure? Or would you rather somebody take 100%, water it down to make it 200%, and then give you half of a pure. That's how I look at this is how I look from being in a healed perspective, being in a balanced space, because now I can set my boundaries. And now when I split myself up in between the stuff that I do, everything that I do gets 100% quality. If I'm doing a podcast, 100% quality. When I'm doing consultations and sessions and readings, 100% quality. When I'm doing a lecture, 100% quality. Whatever I'm doing, I'm putting 100% quality in. This is understanding that you are a multifaceted being of light. So if 1 grain of my light is pure, then all my shit pure. I'm always going to put out some good shit. So from every direction, somebody's going to get that good information. This is the aspect of resisting the fight that exists. And resisting the fighting for existing. And allowing yourself to come into that darkness to learn how to gain your light so you can live. That's just how it should always be. But what do I know? I'm just coming from a whole different galaxy and shit sometimes. Thank you for choosing the God Hour. Stay tuned for the closeout. No, of course I had to leave you plugged in right before we get to the end of another powerful episode. Let the knowledge take you to that next level as you heal. If you need assistance in your healing and your transcendental journey, of course, you hit up GodaCoAlchemistLLC.com. Everything from the natal chart analysis to general readings, consultations. I'm doing a consultation. If this is your first time listening or you've been a long time listener, I'm doing the consultations, $65. It includes in the beginning we do the shadow reading, and then we do the bill based on the questions that you ask and get you into that space. GodaCoAlchemistLLC.com. You can also hit me for the business aspects, working with me on an episode of the podcast. You have a product that you will want to sell, sponsorship, getting yourself plugged into the plug talk, or getting yourself plugged into one of the spots for sponsoring the podcast and getting your information out there, getting your stuff out to the world, because all we do is grow over here. PapaLucy666@gmail.com. That's the one for the more personal side questions about services, questions about books, whatever you need on that aspect, build on that. Or you always can hit the number at 910-777-7708. Gotta Go Alchemist, the YouTube channel. That's the home or the front of that lectures. Last week we got into the aspects of observations. This time we're gonna be getting into a little more of understanding the collective. Stay tuned for the information on that. And if you're listening tonight, if you're listening today, today the only day that matters, tonight via Facebook Live, the God Hour Show, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when we get into the aspects of Q&A and get into a little deeper into this week's topic. Law of correspondence and how you use it to work and move forward. What else? Oh yeah, there are 4 spots, 4 free readings, 5 card live done on the air, 4 5-card general readings. In order to get that one of those spots, you must inbox me via Facebook, Rock Caller Nijis. Inbox me your question to solidify and grab one of those spots. There's only 4 spots. But if you don't get one of the 4 spots, that 2-day being the only day special, you know, we do the first call being free, 3 calls for 5 and 10 calls for, 5 calls for 15. Yeah. But we about to get into this closeout. I just want to say I appreciate you for all the support. To become a monthly patron, you become a monthly patron, support the podcast. Or if you have that product, you have a product or a service, you can also support the podcast. That way we're becoming a full sponsor. Either way, I grow, you grow, we grow. That's how we go to the next level. Thank you for staying plugged in. You could be, once again, anywhere in the world right now, but you listening to the master of ceremonies and the spiritual advisor, the shaman, Papa Lucy. Stay tuned for the closeout. Ooh. As we wrap up another episode of the God Hour podcast, I just be excited after like doing all this work and we put it all in. And that was the main aspect. But that key to your corresponding and creating the correspondences within the alignment of where you need to go, you have to acknowledge that inner child and understand those aspects of when being within the 10 going on 30. Understanding that, have you emotionally evolved? Have you emotionally healed to accept the evolution? Have you physically healed to accept that aspect of evolution? Have you spiritually evolved in these aspects and healing to accept that aspect of evolution? This changes the aspects of the perspective that you take on life and what you naturally project into the life, into the world. This changes your aspects on understanding the reflections. Remember, you can't be mad at the mirror with the HG lights for showing you your scars. You can't be mad at that aspect. So why would you be mad at any other reflection outside is meant to teach you how to go forward? And that ends you into the aspects of stop existing and resisting. Stop existing to fight, or rather stop being the resistance fighting for existence. Stop being part of the resistance fighting simply for existence. It's time for you to live. In order to live, you have to understand that chaos comes before creation. So without the chaos, there is no creation. Without learning from that chaos, you cannot control your creation. You cannot control your evolution. You cannot allow yourself to go to the next level. So how can you build balance? How can you build a balanced corresponding alignment when you coming from a space of imbalance, when you coming from a space of hurt, when you come from a space of jaded perspective and immature emotional growth? How can you take yourself to the next level and accept what it is that you want? Accept what it is that you need to take yourself forward. Those are the keys. This has been an episode of that God Hour podcast. If you're listening to this again on 2-day being the only day that matters, I'll see you guys at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight, Facebook Live, Tuesdays, every Tuesday. We do the God Hour show. You know, we got the Q&A. We go a little deeper into the topic of aspects of the law of correspondence and alignment. That's going to be the topic. Q&A. I'm going to put up the post early in the day to give out 4 free readings live on the air. And if you don't get one of those spots, remember the first call is free. 3 calls for 5 and 5 calls for 15. You know, that's the special on the Tuesday. I want you to be the greatest. I want you to heal. I want you to get better. I want you to live. I want you to love. I want you to be the best thing, period. I want you to be the best, bettered version of yourself. Take yourself to the next level. Papa Lucy your host and master of ceremonies also provides that service to help you get through that threshold and understand yourself more. But this is our becoming. What you become from this point is solely up to you. What you do from this point is solely up to you. There's no more excuses. Do the work, or you will be coming back to this shit with baby brain. But we get into that another time. You could be anywhere, but this message is moving you. Everything from the guide thought to the message in the weekly reading and the clarity down to the session. If it resonates with you, time to put in that work. I love you. You love us. Ashe.